Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us approach midlife, we try to reflect on our lives and realize there are particular patterns and ways that we exist. We also discover that during this patterning, that this occurs in the outer natural world, but also within the individual psyche as well. From fairy tales, sacred texts, and our dreams, we find expressions of this inner tendency toward ordering and meaning. These patterns reflect the eternal principles which have influenced life from the beginning of time and remain alive in each and every one of us throughout our lives. We're going to discover about the research that is done by a particular institute on trauma and the healing of it, as we're joined today by Dr. Michael Conforti, who is a Jungian analyst and the founder and the director of the Psyche Institute. He has been a faculty member at the C.G. Jung Institute in Boston and the C.G. Jung Foundation of New York. He joins us here today to talk about patterns in psyche and the natural world. Dr. Michael Conforti, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Now, let's talk about the nature of the work of this particular institute here and how it helps guide, or I guess, help people to more self-realization, I'm guessing?
Yeah, well, how it began first. I made my pilgrimage to Italy. My family's from southern Italy, Sicily and Naples, and I made my pilgrimage back, 25, 30 years ago. And during that trip, I wanted to go to Assisi, Italy, which St. Francis has always been a patron saint of mine. And I went there, and I just had this incredible, overwhelming sense that I needed to come back here someday and do a program about the confluence of matter and spirit, to bring theologians, physicists, Jungian analysts, and artists all together to talk about the kind of work we're going to be talking about today in this interview. And what really emerged from that is now a 25, 30-year project, and we have over 20,000 people around the world in groups in many different countries studying this. And what it's really about, I think the bottom line of what this work is about is that there are these entities in life that shape us, that we don't even know about, invisible, psychological, psychic, spiritual entities that shape a life. And I really got caught by the fever of looking at patterns many years ago, a pattern of how families are organized and how families work together, relationships, teams. I was an athlete growing up, how teams begin to work together. And you realize, lo and behold, there's something that is really working behind the scenes to structure those dynamics. And I said, okay, let me look at the patterns first, and then what drives these patterns. So one of the things that I think really helps people is, number one, to say we have to really strive to understand what is shaping our life, and number two, how do we begin interacting with that? And I think a lot of people live with an understandable fallacy, which is we're totally the masters of our own domain. You know that line. We drive our cars. We know where we're going to go. We determine our own fate. We determine our own destiny. Well, guess what? Look at history. Look at history. Look at myth. Look at fairy tales. And just look at world history, and you realize that concurrent with our own desires and hopes and goals, there's something else. It's like right now, my office is right on the ocean here in Connecticut, right on Vista, Connecticut. And you could guide your boat a certain way, and if those waves start to hit, you're going to be affected by those waves. And it's the same with life, that there are these impersonal, transpersonal elements that begin to affect us. And then especially when we get into the realm of trauma, if one is really honest with himself, one who has been traumatized or one who lives with someone that's been through trauma such as an early death of a parent, the death of a child, incest, violence in homes, alcoholic homes, when you're fully honest and you look at that mirror and you dust it off and you say, my God, my life has been a series of repetitions of this trauma. How is it that people that come from alcoholic homes end up with alcoholic partners and alcoholic tendencies themselves? How is it that people that come from early death experiences tend to repeat the drama of premature endings in their life in so many ways? Through initiatives, through relationships, financial, economic, otherwise. Economic, emotional, spiritual, things seem to short-circuit and stop prematurely. And this is the work I've been involved in for many years, and my God, who would ever believe this story? It's like you come back from another continent and say, who would ever believe the power of repetitions? And Freud wrote about this. I'll shut up in a minute here. But Freud wrote about it back in his early work when he talked about repetition compulsion. And he said, basically, we become yoked to the oxen of repeating. And he had one great line. His line is, we repeat what we don't want to remember. And Jung, the great Swiss psychoanalyst, said, what we don't face consciously comes back to us as fate. Those two pieces are part of the pillars of what drives a lot of this work, when you realize, my God, we repeat and we repeat and we repeat unknowingly the traumas of our life by the so-called choices we make and proclivities and inclinations we have. So this is the work we've done for 30 years, and we have faculty all over the world, and I've been very happy to have invited many of the world leaders in these different professions, from physics to Jung to art, religion, or whatever. And these people have been incredibly gracious to come and teach.
Now, tell us about the nature of your work with things such as trauma. It seems to me that if we can come to see and know that we're following patterns, as you hear in physics a lot of times, our inner reality is reflected into the outer world. Does actually this kind of work help people make necessary changes?
I think it does. I really do. Because when somebody could sit back and have somebody help them see that, you do realize that, let's say, in the world of dating and marriages, excuse me, that you begin to see, my God, I've married the same person 3-4 times, one could say. That they have the same tendency. At work, they get into the same conflicts, the same imbroglios, on and on and on. And at some point, where it gets really profound is when somebody can realize, my God, I'm really not in control of this one. At that moment, not only is it the beginning of psychological insight and capacity for change, but also it's the beginning of realizing that there is a greater reality. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It certainly is. I know it was interesting. Many years ago, I was doing an interview with Michael Shermer, who wrote a book, The Search for God in the Age of Science. And the biggest contention he had in his book is that we seek patterns. It's a way to become familiar with our world. And so what you're talking about really makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know if so much we don't consciously seek patterns. We're drawn to them. And when you look at habits in nature, the habits of animals, the schooling of fish, the hibernation of whatever, of bears, and coming out of hibernation, we have similar patterns. And these patterns seem to grip our lives, and we get gripped in the vortex of these patterns. And, if we have time, I can tell you some of these stories. Again, you shake your head and say, it can't be true. It can't be true that time and time again these same dynamics grip somebody. Yeah. So when one can come to grips with that and see that, and then begin to do the work, some really wonderful changes can happen. One major example, but a very brief one, is I've worked with a few women in particular that have lost children. I don't think there's not that you want to make a comparative chart of trauma, but it's one of the most unimaginable traumas of life. Are you a parent?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I am too. You almost can't go there. You almost can't go with the thought of, my God, my kid is gone. And what I found is that there is a pattern. There's a pattern response to trauma. And what that means is many people that have lost a child, they go down what seems to be, excuse my language, but it seems to be a pre-paved road where they themselves, the parent, lives as though they're dead for a long period of time. All the activities in their life, their ambitions, and all of it. And clearly there needs to be a period, and no one knows how long it should be. No one ever wrote the book on this, and no book's going to be written about saying it's X months and 9 months, whatever. But you do see that there are many instances where the person can never come out of that. That becomes a possession. And number one of the real helps for somebody who's been through this experience, is to say to them, and I say it in all sincerity, I don't like gimmicks, I hate gimmicks, I hate strategies, and I say openly, I can't imagine what you've been through. As a parent, I cannot imagine the horror you're living with. As a colleague of mine said, who also lost a child, he said, my life will never be the same. I will never know happiness the way I did before. And when you could say that to somebody, and stop all of the cheerleading. It's going to be different. It's going to get better. 5 months, 8 months, 9 months. Oh, stop the nonsense, please. Your life will never be the same. That's not me talking. It's not that person talking. It's not this therapist talking. It's nature. Nature will tell you that your life has taken such a shock that can you ever go back and enjoy that meal in the way you did before? You can enjoy meals, but not like that. Can you ever enjoy lovemaking the way you did before? No. And so a lot of the work of patterning, and we have our own training program here, is really help people understand the nature of the pattern that is attendant to that trauma. And again, it's not a hand-in-glove fit. That's not what I mean. But there are pattern responses. I mean, people that have gone through the horror of incest. How many times when people go to groups, like survivor of incest, and they say, you got that tendency too? Oh, my God, you date that kind of person? You do that? Oh, my God, I didn't know anybody else did it. And I thought it was just them. And you realize there is a commonality of experience. That's pretty damn profound. And in no way is that ever meant to reduce the personal experience to a collective and saying, oh, yours isn't important. Of course it's important. But when you realize there is a reality that is so big that can consume the individual in its own vortex, like the vortex of recovery, the vortex of repeating the trauma, the vortex of the pattern of what people that have been through trauma do, people that have been through loss, how they deal with attachment issues or don't deal with attachment issues. And you begin to see there's such a high degree of regularity in nature and such a high degree of regularity in the psyche, especially when it comes to our responses, our unconscious responses to trauma. So you comment about that other person that wrote the book. It's a good one, but it's not that we so much look for them, but they come looking for us in some ways, and we step into them.
Mm-hmm. Now, describe. You seem to be describing the work that you do. How is this different then? It sounds to me like, you have people that become cheerleaders, as you were saying, in the midst of someone's trauma. But tell us how your work works, I guess.
Well, as a way to begin this, be a part of the discussion. For years, I've been steeped in a lot of Holocaust literature, reading a lot about Holocaust and survivors and experiences and the art that comes out of it, the music, all of that. And you realize so many people want to not make light, but they don't really want to put the utter horror of trauma where it belongs. And I found a lot of people I work with, and I was shocked to hear this, to be totally honest with you. They said, no therapist I've ever been to before has said it's unimaginable what I've been through. No therapist has every therapist before has given me some kind of homework. Try this, do that, to do the cheerleading, like you just mentioned. And they say you're the only one that ever has really given such credence to the blackness of what I feel at times. And you say, well, how's that therapeutic? It's therapeutic because it gives a name to, and it says, you know what? This is the place you're going to go to. It's going to be part of your life. It's going to be part of your experience. And it gives such a sense of, like, taking a deep breath and say, oh, my God, all these years I just thought I was neurotic. I was just self-indulgent. I just thought I was caught in a trauma. I thought I should be able to enjoy that meal again, should be able to enjoy that movie, that lovemaking again in the same way I did before. And what you're telling me, they say many times, is what I believed in my heart of hearts, but I never wanted to accept. And everyone told me I was wrong. People would say, it's going to be different. The meal's going to be just as good as it was before. Excuse me. This is Dr. Conforti. You're one of the first and few that say it's going to always be different. There's a hole in your heart. And there is something really, oh, God, who can I say? I can't think of the right word. It's something potentially healing about that because you stop fighting against nature. You stop fighting against the nature of the trauma itself. And that gives you some tools then. And you realize that there are ways that one can perpetuate that drama of loss and decay. And you begin to interact with it and say, you know what, maybe I don't need to do this one again. I work with somebody who grew up as an orphan, traumatized, double, triple horrors that went with being orphaned. And her story throughout her life as an adult was she kept on giving away things she loved to people. why are you giving away all this stuff to people, to everybody? Cars and money and this and that, to her own detriment. And I said, you seem to be wedded to the pattern of what? Of giving away. Isn't that your story? She was given away as an infant. And again, when you step back and say, it can't really be true. It can't really be true that your life is organized around that center point. Well, it does, unbeknownst to us. And when you begin to seeing it, then you can do something about it. Interact with it, make some different choices eventually. But the ultimate thing is to say, yes, this will always be part of my life.
Now, I would guess, too, when you think about people who tend to be, as viewed by people, relationship addicts. They'll go into a relationship, it's good for a month or two, 3 if you're lucky, then they move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of patterns that we're looking at here, some real consistencies in a person's behavior. Is that correct?
Exactly, perfect. You're a wonderful listener.
Well, I wanted to be sure because it sounded like that's what you were saying. It was interesting. I remember hearing, this was some time ago, an interview on the afterlife. And this guy, he was really fascinating to listen to because he says a lot of times as we reincarnate, we tend to be drawn to the kinds of people or groups of people that we were in past lives. And he gave like some examples. For instance, there was Bill and Kumar, something about White Castle or something like that, how those two actors in there were actually Larry Fine and and Moe the Three Stooges.
Well, we're wondering what Trump was in a prior life. That's our next challenge.
Yeah, somebody who's brash and out there just kicking up a storm and just saying whatever he wants. But do you tend to use past lives also in the realm of this kind of work?
I don't think I don't find it a compelling piece because I think we have enough to deal with in this life, number one. And also, I had a colleague that really was one of the leaders in that field of past life regression, Roger Wilger, and he did some really wonderful work with that. I've never felt that drawn to because what they seem to look at in past lives are patterns and how, like you just said, you're following a pattern. So when you begin to understand patterns, you realize, say it in scientific language that I'll translate, you really collapse the whole space-time function. Is this the past, the present, or the future? When in a pattern, it's timeless. Fairy tales begin once upon a time. In Italian, you say una volta, tanti anni fa, a time many, many years ago. It's meant to convey the timelessness of all this. So when you find yourself caught in a pattern, like you say, relationship junkies or whatever, that's a timeless pattern. Yes, Mary or Joey's doing this, but this has been done from the beginning of time. And you find there is often a contiguous line. So if you want to go past lives, that's really a lot of what they're identifying. Now, I do think there's some compelling arguments. There's a guy named Stevenson. I think he was University of Virginia. He wrote, oh my God, this brilliant, I think, 3-volume set on reincarnation with stories that, again, would make your mouth drop, say, there's no other explanation but reincarnation. So, I'm open to it. But as a therapeutic piece to bring it to patients or clients, I personally don't see the need to do that right now. I think we have enough to work over here. And we do have transgenerational issues, there's no question. They say with Holocaust survivors, it's the second generation that feels it really strongly. Obviously the victims themselves, then it skips a generation and the next generation. They're even saying right now that in the neurobiology that we actually inherit some of the, I don't know the right language, so bear with me, we inherit some of the chemistry of the Holocaust victims. Each successive generation is still carrying some of the chemistry of what these people went through. So, I'm not saying it's not real. It's probably very real. In this case, Stevenson really made some compelling discussions and arguments for the existence of reincarnation. I'm with him on it. I just don't see the need to bring it into therapy right now. Maybe it's my limitation. But
I think that's interesting to bring up at this particular juncture because you sometimes will hear in people, especially in the idea of the afterlife, well, you're coming back here because if you didn't learn those lessons in your past life, then you're going to try to learn them in this one so that you can move forward. You'll also sometimes maybe hear, well, you had an agreement with God, then you came into this life to fulfill whatever that agreement was. And what you tend to think when you hear this kind of talk is that, so when we come into life, we really don't have the kind of free choice like we believe we do, because it sounds like it's already preordained how we're supposed to be. And I thought the one thing we were empowered with was that free will. And it almost sounds like, well, no, because you've got these patterns that are going on here, as you say, since the beginning of time, and it's a matter of maybe recognizing, wrestling with those and breaking through them, especially if they're not really helping your life function in a way you would like to.
Well, a couple of responses. It's a big point you're bringing up. Get a little bit of water, excuse me a second, Daniel.
One of the patterns that a person gets when they talk about something as deep as this is they get thirsty, and sometimes it's just in our nature that we have to fulfill that particular pattern of the thirst cycle.
I like that. Yeah, you're good. You're good. I mean, let's go first to what Plato said about patterns. And interestingly enough, he used patterns and destiny interchangeably. And he gave this incredible image. He said, the destiny of an individual is coming down, all written down on a piece of paper. And the closer it gets to your life, the closer it gets to you, all the ink disappears. And all you have is a blank piece of paper. And it's not that there's no free will or whatever, but I think what Plato and many of the ancients talked about was there is a pattern to life. Maybe, like for you, maybe your pattern is something about radio and communication. For me, there's a pattern of education, which I love. It's been in my family, and somehow it's in my blood. I love it. Lecturing and teaching. Everybody has something, and it doesn't mean again that we are chained to that, and it doesn't mean there's one thing. I mean, interesting. The verb in Italian for destiny is destinare, which means there's an orientation. It doesn't mean you have to go to Portland, Oregon. You got to go to Brooklyn, New York. You got to go here. It means there's something about, like psychologically speaking, something about the West Coast for you. Education, communication. There's something about East Coast for you. It's something about building and merchandise and fabricating things, making things, whatever. And I think that's very real, because if you look at a life, you see everyone has a certain orientation. When my boy was born, from 1 year old on, and he's now 24, he had this incredible gift. He still has, I should say, this incredible gift with art. He'd be sitting at the table, 2 years old, 3 years old, and he would take some salt out of the salt thing. We have like an open dish of salt like you do in Europe. And you put it on a table, he put it on a table, and he would start making things. He would make a face out of it. He would make a leg, or he'd make a design, or a boat, or a sail. And it's never stopped for him. He was born with that. He didn't get it from me. I can't do that kind of art, nor did his mother have that artistic ability. But that was with him from the start. And it's the orienting part of his life. And I think everybody has something.
Well, I know when they talk, for instance, about genius, it's really interesting when you look a little deeper in that, how, we can all allegedly over a period of time develop genius in a particular direction, whatever that may be. So, for instance, Mozart was one of those considered to be this musical genius by the time he was 3 or 4 years old or 2. Who knew that he was able to achieve levels that would just astound people? But what's overlooked in that story is how, well, music was surrounding him anyway. His parents were that way. They taught, and you start realizing these things and go, okay, well, maybe there's not as much genius as we originally thought here. He's just somebody expressing a pattern that he was already in. Yeah,
well, I think that's very true. I mean, sometimes it can be the environment. They talk about nature, nurture, and all this. It's probably innate proclivities for certain things. He was wired. I mean, maybe you and I would be wired differently, even in that same home.
Right.
Who knows? But yes, you could look at it. But the big picture here again is, whether you look at it as destiny and whatever, is that we begin to know something about our lives by virtue of the patterns we live. And that's where you take out of the realm of illness and you're sick and you're stuck. Freud once said that the dream is the royal road to the unconscious. In other words, Freud believed the dream was a way to really understand yourself. Jung, on the other hand, said the complex is the royal road to the unconscious. And what he meant by that is those situations in life that trigger us. Everyone's got a trigger, right? I mean, I'm sure if I mention 80 words, 2 or 3 of them are going to trigger you. You mention 80 words, 2 or 3 of them are going to trigger me. I get a reaction to it. The rest of them be very neutral, two of them, they say, what are you saying? What did you just say to me? What did you just bring up? And it's one of the ways that whatever that trigger point is in us, it means that's a hot spot. And while that hot spot may be undeveloped, primitive, overreacting, whatever, it's telling you that's where you need to do your work. That's the work. I mean, take an athlete, Take an athlete and the coach says, you're a really good hitter, but you're having trouble with the curveballs. Come in the batting cage and take 2 hours every day, hit curveballs. That becomes that becomes a very important piece of them, and they may become really good curveball hitters, and may become much better batters as a result of it. Somebody who realizes that, my God, the level of attachment to a lover, to a partner, is so shallow. And if they have the courage to face that, the issue of attachment and love may become in a good way an elevated goal for them, a really important goal. And they may become wonderful and incredibly sensitive to their partners because they were so estranged for so long. So I don't look at this as, look what's wrong with you, look what you've done, oh my God. No, I do see it as an opportunity, and I don't mean that just trying to make nice of difficult things. Difficult things happen, and we all suffer these. And it can become, as they say, the wound that heals.
It's really nice to hear this, that we don't take a look at problems, or that you folks don't take a look at problems as something that needs to be changed and erased as though it never happened, but you're saying, no, this is a part of yourselves. I had actually done a segment a couple of years ago on the dark angels of ourselves, and it was really interesting to listen to that because she said she went into that for about 3 to 4 years. But she says in coming out of it, so to speak, she says, I really embrace that I have that opportunity because that was the deepest part of me that needed the most love. And I began to see the world in a much colorful way after that.
That's
and
exactly
so, it's sort of like up there with Nietzsche, that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah.
I guess there's a lot of wisdom in the simplicity of that statement.
Well, a lot of wisdom. That's exactly the point. I'll tell you a little story. My wife taught me something really great. She's a choreographer and a great artist, okay, and a scholar. And she told me about something in the Japanese tradition called kinsakori. Now, it's brief, but really meaningful for what we're talking about right now. She told me a story that in ancient Japan, this one emperor had a really beautiful piece of a gorgeous vase. Today, maybe $2 million worth, right? But it was very special, sacred to them. And someone accidentally broke it. And he was ready off with the head, oh my God, look what you did. And there was an artist who said, Emperor, I can take care of this. And what he did was he took it in his workshop and all that, and he found the broken parts. So let's say you have a big gap in the middle, right? And you have the parts there. He used epoxy and gold and resin. Repaired it. It was all held together. It was nice and strong again. And you literally saw this gold streak, like a border on the broken part, some gold holding it together. And, what do? We break a nice pot, right? If we're going to keep it in the kitchen, we turn it around. Don't let anybody see the broken spots. Don't let them see it. Turn it around. But what they did was they turned that broken spot to the public's eye. What they said was, and I love this, and this is so relevant to our work on trauma and the comment you just made, it's beauty in the broken places. And they went on to say that because of the brokenness, there's something even more beautiful about that person. That's exquisite. And I cite my wife, Laura Lee Scott, Conforti for that. Just given me so much, and what you just said, we stop beating up on yourself and saying, yeah, this is part of me. And it can be a beautiful part of me if I work it. It'll take me down if I don't do anything with it. But if I really work it, and like the Dark Angel story, something very special can come of that. Elie Wiesel, one of the last surviving Holocaust victims, he's very much of somebody whose work I just adore, and I lecture a lot about his work. He said, excuse me, he said it's what we do with the traumas. What do we do? Is there something that God has in store for us? Is there something we're meant to do with these horrific things that happen? He went on to become one of the greatest spokesmen for humanity and liberation movements around the world. He's influenced millions and millions and millions of people. He watched his mother and daughter be incinerated.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow you come out of it. And you never leave it. You never leave it. And my work with trauma is to say, yes, you'll never leave it, but you don't want to be possessed by it.
Right. You know, it's I like what you're saying here. We have about 2 minutes left here, but you know, like a quick story when you were talking about the pattern of maybe where I was meant to be was in broadcasting and communication, but I can say that as I was growing up in school, I was always sent to the principal's office, and it was always or getting punished or missing PE or whatever the case is, because I was always disruptive in class. Then I went into the world of work, and of course, like a dummy, I went into the world of work in manufacturing. So, you know, I would hear things like, you know, when your mouth moves, your hands stop. So you can imagine in the early part of especially my young adulthood thinking, you know, there must be something seriously wrong with me because I'm always getting in trouble, especially for talking too much. You know, then all of a sudden I found myself in the world of restaurant work, and here I was, you know, working as a food server, and it was at a point where I could stand there and talk all day to a table, and that's exactly what I was being paid for, and I'm like, God, you can actually get paid to do this. But there was also a point of me as a child that thought, you know, I would like to be a disc jockey because I would listen to how these guys do their thing, and think, you know, that'd be like one of the coolest jobs, just to sit there and act, you know, like you're everywhere, for instance. And now here I do this kind of work and get very well rewarded for it, but, you know, here was a pattern that I followed that in the wrong realms of its use could get you in a lot of trouble. In the right realm, you get very well rewarded.
Well, it's a beautiful story because you followed your destiny, and it's an art. I mean, I meant it. I wasn't just trying to blow smoke when I said you're a very good listener. I mean, you watch TV shows, and you watch, like, you know, I don't know how old you are, but my day was Johnny Carson, you know, the late night shows, right?
Remember Johnny very well, yes.
Okay. Johnny Carson and Conan O'Brien and all that. And some of those guys are miserable interviewers because they never listen to anybody. They just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and the other person just becomes some kind of screen for them to do their own dumping, as opposed to a good interview. Johnny Carson was a pretty good interviewer. He would listen to people and then talk with a relevant dialogue between them based on what was being said. That's an art. And yeah, you could have been for the rest of your life at the principal's office to talking up too much, you know. But you found a great destiny, and that's the other piece. I know we're going out of time. One word is there is a destiny factor, and how beautiful if you could help somebody see, you know what, maybe you and the big mouth of yours belong somewhere really creatively.
Certainly worked for Fred Flintstone, didn't it? Now, I understand, is there a workshop that's going to be happening here soon?
Actually, next week, our whole program, we're coming to Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
We're going to be in Portland beginning next Thursday through Sunday at a place called Opening to Life. I forget what neighborhood it's called. It's a lovely, lovely building, and many of my friends and colleagues they own it and they practice there. And we're going to be doing a conference all about the theme of both trauma and patterning in the world. And there are a handful of openings right now, maybe 5 or 6 that are left. And we would love to have people contact the Assisi office. Just go online, theassisiinstitute.com, and you will find there's 2 of them. There's one in Rochester, New York, that I'm not associated with, and then there's one that's here in Connecticut. That's with me and Michael Conforti. You get it. And there are a lot of programs, so that's a big one coming up. And I love Portland. I've been teaching there off and on for 15 years. I used to commute there 5 times a year to do a seminar. And it's a wonderful, I love the city. I love it. That's why we're going back there.
And this is at the website again?
It's all on a website, theassisiinstitute.com.
Okay.
All one word, Assisi Institute. And again, remember, there's one in Rochester, New York, which is not us. We're in Connecticut.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the program again to awaken people to the fact that maybe you have a self-destructive pattern, but that's probably because, as I was mentioning with my pattern, is, well, maybe you need to move the realm into a way that it becomes a very successful one, to say the least.
Would be great. Yeah, and that's the hope. That's our hope.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for presenting this work to us. Very interesting stuff here.
My pleasure, and thank you for being such a great listener and interview. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you
again. If you're interested, join us at the conference as my guest. You come then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can follow one of your patterns by going online and visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to stay up to date and in the know with what we're doing here on Beyond 50 Radio. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio as well, and Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.